We see a man impaled on a few spears saying it was a beautiful dream, that he wanted to destroy it, devour it, and tear it down. But unfortunately, the man doesn't finish his sentence because he dies before he can. Another man looks at his corpse and says, "He finally died," a pathetic ending befitting the craftiest of villains. Then he turns his back and walks away from the body. That was the final scene in the novel titled The Villain's End. We see a man sighing. He's the one who wrote the novel, and his name is Nam Hyun. He says that the death of the strongest villain in the world means his series is almost over, and the next chapter will be the finale. He says writing a novel he never wanted to write in the first place was truly a miserable experience. Hyun starts stretching and says at least he'll be able to finish everything tomorrow, and that he needs to leave any regrets behind. Suddenly, someone starts banging on his door violently, and he's startled, wondering who it could be at this hour. He says it's way too late for any delivery, and he heads to the door asking who's there. But as he gets closer, the knocking suddenly stops. He says maybe it was a drunk person, and decides to go back to sleep. On his way back, he notices a piece of paper fluttering in the air. He wonders where it came from, and when he starts reading it, he finds written on it, "A gift, ask for what you want when you need it." Hyun is confused about what it means, and suddenly, a red-black, sinister aura starts leaking out of it. He sees the corpse of the villain he'd been writing about, standing right in front of him. He's terrified, and the villain tells him, "So this is how I die. I spent so much time and effort 10 years honing my blade to avenge my family, lost my lover and my friends, gave up so much, and still failed. And you, Hyun, know that better than anyone." Hyun asks what he means by failed and starts to panic. The man reaches out his hand toward him. Hyun screams, and the aura begins to swallow him. The man says, "Please, do it in my stead, and I'll watch what you do." Everything around him starts to distort. We see a man's body lying on a bed, eyes slowly opening. Hyun jolts up, wondering if he fainted or what, but he sees a strange place in front of him. What's going on here? He then looks at his clothes in confusion and says, "What's with these clothes?" He walks over to a mirror, stunned, asking himself, what is happening? When he sees his face, he says, that ominous crimson hair, the sly mouth, and those narrow eyes that hide any trace of emotion. He realizes exactly what happened. He entered someone else's body, and not just anyone's body, but Arson Adel's, the strongest villain in his novel. And worse, there are only a few days left until his assassination. We then learn that Arson is of a half-demonic lineage. Arson's family is a mixed bloodline descending from demons, and thanks to the power in their blood, they were once among the greatest families in the Empire, but they fell because of 6 designated families. Currently, Arson's lineage has been reduced to just him. That's his background and story, and the reason he's a villain. He tried to get revenge but failed, and that's why he brought him here. In a few days, he'll be killed by the knights of the 6 families. Hyun opens his status screen and says that in terms of talent, Arson Adel was one of the most gifted characters in his novel, but his talent doesn't compare to what he gave the main protagonists. And no matter how compelling the villain is, his intention was never to make him beat the hero. On top of that, he currently can't control mana, and he can't believe that the story he wrote to make this villain frightening has now wrapped around his own neck. He spots the paper fluttering above his bed and freezes. He recognizes it and says it's what dragged him into the novel in the first place. He had completely forgotten about it. He says even if it's not that useful, he's in no position to be picky. He remembers it said to ask when he needs something. When he starts reading the scroll, he gets confused and asks himself why it's empty and where the text that was on it went, because there's nothing he can do in this body. Suddenly, writing appears on the scroll and addresses him as the author. It tells him if he doesn't know how to use the gift, answer yes or no. Hyun trembles and says, "What does it mean by author?" Then realizes the one speaking to him is the real Adele. Adele simply tells him to write yes or no on the paper. Hyun writes yes, ignoring his urge to figure out the situation. After that, the scroll starts forming new text, explaining how to use information and make purchases, assuring him it will answer anything he writes on this paper, with some questions costing nothing and others having a price. Adele tells him the more important the question, the higher the price. Hyun asks how he can return to his real world, and Adele replies, "That's impossible." Hyun says he wasn't counting on that anyway, but he needs to know how to use mana and the body's traits, because he has to deal with the urgent matters first. Adele replies that this question costs nothing, that controlling mana and how to use the body's traits have already been discussed, and asks if he agrees. Hyun says yes and starts smiling, saying he can feel the mana. The first trait is called Shroud of Darkness, the ability to steal a person's 5 senses. We see him forming a small vortex in his hand and saying it's usually much bigger than this, but even like this, it'll be very useful. The next power is the ability to restrain opponents through his aura, called Killing Intent. It works, but trained knights or soldiers will be able to resist it, though it will affect ordinary ordinary people. Now, all he needs is to understand Adel's main talent, called position swap. It's simply the ability to switch his place with any object he chooses, considered the best assassination skill ever. He starts using the first part of the skill, called marking, and says he can mark an area of about 20 square yards only, which is weak compared to his power in the novel, but with constant training it'll be very strong. He decides to test it on the armor in his room, so he moves toward it and creates a link between them, then uses the second part of the skill, called transfer, and swaps places with the suit of armor in an instant, which makes him stumble and crash toward the wall. He says it looks like he won't master it on the first try, but he's ready to repeat it hundreds of times if needed, because he's racing against time to survive, since the knights of the 6 families are on their way to kill him. At that moment, the main gate of the family estate opens, and the knights enter. The servants look worried, and one of them is asked where Adel is. He replies he's inside his room. We're introduced to the captain of the Knights of the Lion County, named Viltz. He asks about his condition, and is told Adel hasn't moved in days, so Viltz looks a bit disappointed. Then he storms the room with his men. We see Adel. Adel says, Viltz has no intention of leaving a little kid alive. Viltz replies, nonsense. Then orders his men to finish him. One of them steps forward saying, yes sir, but Adel uses the first ability of position swap, and switches places with the soldier's weapon to stab the soldier's neck directly, shocking Viltz and his guards. Viltz orders his men to kill him immediately. Adel takes the chance to escape and jumps out the window. As he falls, he throws his dagger toward the ground, then links to it and transfers to it to avoid the damage from the fall. He says he has to reach the forest and starts running toward it. Viltz orders his men to pursue him. Inside Arson's forest, we see him exhausted and panting, saying, even if I'm lucky enough to escape the knights and get past the area, I still won't make it. So he decides to go through the gate in this forest to the demon world, which recently suffered major damage because of a war with humans. He says if he shows enough talent, they might accept him among them. But the problem was something else. Before he can explain it, he hears horses and wonders how they caught up so fast. We hear Viltz ordering his men to spread out and search for him. Then he continues, saying the problem is he doesn't know the exact location of the gate, but he's sure he's close to it. Then he steps on a branch that snaps loudly, and he realizes immediately that it's trouble. A massive attack infused with green aura tears through the forest. Viltz says, was he hiding here? We see Adel landing using his teleporting ability, saying he only has 1 or 2 uses left, so he has to hurry and find the gate. Then he adds, maybe there's no other option. After that, the real Arson asks for the exact location of the gate that leads to the demon world. The other replies that this information has a price, and he must pay either 100 gold coins or a relic of sacred relic, rank or higher. Adel replies he doesn't have anything like that right now, but suddenly, an attack hits him from behind, blasting him into the air and sending him rolling across the ground before he slams into a tree trunk. Viltz approaches him and asks if he ran because he wants to live. Then he adds, you'll die here whether you want to or not. Adel replies, don't make me laugh. I'm not dying here because there's one way left, and I've decided to try it, whether it works or not. Viltz asks if he plans to resist to the end, and says, you're still the head of the family after all. Adel mocks Baird and asks why he's acting so dignified when a bunch of grown-ups are chasing one kid, and suggests he switch careers to babysitting because that suits him better. Then he laughs and adds that might be hard for him even on his own. Viltz gets riled up easily by the mockery, and says he was planning to finish him off painlessly, but now he'll stab his heart with the sword the Count Lion gave him. He lunges with the sword, saying, die. Adel realizes this is his chance. The paper lifts itself and strikes Viltz's sword, and a message pops up thanking him for paying the price, saying the amount paid was just a little more than needed, but it'll guide him to the gate immediately. Adel is thrilled his gamble worked, while Viltz is shocked and confused because his sword starts disappearing from his hand. Adel looks to his side and sees a huge red light, so he uses his teleportation ability to warp right next to it. Viltz sees him moving and yells for him to stop, but Adel has no intention of doing that and can't believe he followed him all this way in the first place. Now he's standing in front of the demon world gate, but Viltz rips a tree out and uses it as a weapon, saying he won't let him get away. He hurls it with tremendous force. As it nears the back of Adel's head, Adel smiles and teleports into the gate. Viltz stays where he is, seething that Adel slipped through his fingers. Not just that, Adel even bids him farewell with, see you later, Mr. Viltz, and Viltz screams, damn it. After a while, Adel wonders how much time has passed as we see him munching on pieces of jerky. He says that after he came to from passing through the gate, he found himself inside a cell, a man-made cell called the Place of Secret Demonic Arts. He wonders why there's jerky on a stone bed to begin with, whether someone was guarding a treasure here, and notes there's a barrier that blocks attacks and, right in front of him, a stone guardian. Adele doesn't know which great family built this place, but it's full of strange stuff, and that guardian looks terrifying just to look at. If he tries to face it now, he might get completely wrecked. Suddenly, the paper starts glowing and tells him this is the only time it won't penalize him, but warns that he can't offer things he doesn't own. Adele sneers that the guy's crazy, but it means he'll overlook it this time. Then he notices something. A part of the wall looks odd. He goes up to it, puts his palm on it, and says he can sense these things only because he's inside Adele's body. A voice tells him he has no right, and he recalls this is the mechanism that disables the barrier, saying it's a shame he has to find another way to get out of here. He looks at a stone piece on the ground, and says it fell off the guardian, and if it's made of stone, this might work in his favor. He starts tethering himself to it, then teleports and swaps places with the stone. Now that he's moved through the barrier, he says, "Alright, it actually worked." The guardian immediately leaps at him with its mouth open. The scene shifts to another place where we see a massive castle and a stunning sky, like the sun during an eclipse. Someone spills something on the ground and gets scolded, while another person watches from above. That's Cried, the head of a major clan in the demon world, specifically from the Paris family. Cried says the place is really crowded, maybe because his daughter is about to attempt a raid on the mid-tier hidden domain, which is a very complicated matter. If she succeeds, she'll earn the right to enter Sight, a school in the demon world. But even if he orders her not to, she'll defy him, because she sees no way to avenge her mother, who was killed by humans, except by entering Sight. He says she's far too weak, and he has no idea if she'll survive in a place where only scum as bad as demons gather, then sighs with worry. A maid comes in and tells him there's a problem. He asks what it is to cause all this fuss, and she apologizes, and says she just wanted to inform him that someone is currently inside the hidden domain. He asks if she's sure, and she says yes, and there are no traces that the door was open to let them in, which is what has everyone puzzled. Cried asks if they've identified who it is, and she replies that he touched the entry mechanism from the inside, and that's all they know so far. No one knows who he is. Cried says maybe he was forcibly summoned through the gate that was created during the human-demon war. He then tells the maid that he'll definitely die, so there's no need to worry about him, and they should focus on preparations for his daughter's exam. She says, "Understood," and Cried looks out the window again, saying that if things go well, he might get a decent benefit out of it, provided that he dies inside the hidden domain. We cut back to Adel as he swaps places with the stone again, screaming as he stretches his hand toward the ground and says he almost died. That means even if the barrier disappeared, he'd still be in trouble if he stepped out. But he suddenly stops and says, "Wait, the guardian is made of stone too." He decides to try it. He activates his mark ability, tethers himself to the guardian, smiles, and says, "Got it," then swaps places with it. The guardian is stunned and starts attacking the barrier, trying to get out. Adel says he'll die if it keeps that up, and now he just needs to find the exit. But he stops again because there's another barrier, and this time, on the other side is a giant insect. He says it looks like there's a challenge at every stage, and this one's way more dangerous than the wolf. But as expected, the insect is also made of stone, and he can leave it on the other side too. At this stage, the ground starts collapsing, and Adel begins swapping places with chunks of the terrain. He says it's super easy as long as there's somewhere to warp to within the trap zone. He lands safely on the other side and is greeted by someone at the end. Adel is surprised they're welcoming an intruder and says, "Looks like this is the boss room," and asks if someone's inside. He approaches, and we see a skeleton in armor. Adel recognizes him right away as a Death Knight. He says, based on his power, he's about the same level as Feltz. The Death Knight tells Adel he respects him for getting this far. In that moment, Adel tethers himself to him, and then swaps places again. The Dead Knight is still trying to finish his sentence while Adel wonders where the treasure is. When Adel spots the treasure, he says it's bigger than he thought. There's also an ornament engraved with a black dragon. Adel says the ornament looks familiar and wonders where he's seen it before. Then he remembers that among the highest-ranking demon families that represent the 7 deadly sins, the black dragon symbolizes sin and pride, the 7th sin associated with the Paris family. He says if Cried catches him, he'll be killed on the spot. He opens the chest, saying that since it's come to this, he just wants to empty it and run. There's gotta be something useful inside. But the moment he opens it, something jumps out of the chest, sticks to his face, and starts choking him. Then it forces its way down his throat. He starts gagging and choking, grabbing his head and screaming in pain. We then see a lot of blood spraying and hear Adel gasping as we see his eyeball on the ground. He asks how long he's been out and why his eye is on the floor. He draws his sword and looks at his reflection to find his eye has turned black and purple. He asks if the liquid that attacked him is what he thinks it is, and starts checking his stats. We see he got a new trait called Eye of Superb Ea, which gives a massive boost to motion vision, an effect that activates after he kills an enemy. He says, thanks to this ability, he'll never lose to groups of weaker enemies, and maybe coming here was the right call. He gets up, saying he's taken everything he needs, so he has to leave now. He says he was so fixated on the chest he didn't notice there's another door behind him. He wonders what to do. He's made a lot of noise and there are definitely a lot of soldiers waiting outside, and he'll be killed if he walks out. He wonders if he needs to kneel faster than the speed of light to avoid getting killed on the spot. He says, first off, if they find out I'm from House Arsene, they'll kill me even if I beg for mercy, so I have to hide my family crest. Then the Dead Knight screams and orders them to open the door immediately, which startles Adele, adding that, Her Highness is coming fast, so open up. Adele wonders what that means, then guesses the jerky on the bed might have been because this place is a domain created by the upper families for training. He says he needs to find out whose domain this is, because he stole the reward they were supposed to get, and they'll tear him to pieces if they catch him. So he asks the magic scroll about the nearest notable person to him. The scroll replies that information has a price, and he needs to pay something equal to 100 gold coins, or an artifact of relic grade or higher. He wonders what else he can pay, and decides to sacrifice a portion of his mana, paying 100 off his maximum mana. He says it'll be rough, but he can recover it later if he survives. The scroll agrees to the deal and starts draining his mana, then tells him the nearest notable person to him is Renee, Cride's youngest daughter, and we see her approaching him. Adele says his life is over. This is a domain created by the Paris family to train the youngest daughter, and the Eye of Superbia was the reward she was supposed to get upon clearing the domain. And since Renee has enough authority within the family, she'll cut through the guards like butter and appear before him, which is exactly what she does. We see her kill the Death Knight in one strike, then stare at Adel. He says he's going to do it. She points her sword at him and asks him to introduce himself. So he kneels on one knee, congratulates her on clearing the domain, and says she's finally worthy. She starts to set the intent to kill and orders him to explain immediately. He says the president ordered him to be her guard, adding that their eyes met, but it seems she didn't recognize the Eye of Pride. She asked if they really sent him for that, and he replied that, despite his appearance, he's very skilled and intends to use Rennie to get out of here. She started laughing, so he wondered if she didn't trust him. He switched places with her sword and got close to her in an instant. That surprised her, and she appeared holding his wrist. He said he believes he'll be useful in protecting her. She pulled her hand away immediately and looked extremely angry, but she composed herself and ignored it. He said it's good she's letting it slide. Then Adil said she needed to go and see the president immediately because he was waiting for her. She said okay, and he replied that he was going to finish the remaining tasks he'd been assigned because he needed to leave this place as soon as possible. When he opened the door, he said he'd make sure not to be late. Rennie froze in place, and her father, Crade, appeared standing in front of her. Crade started laughing as he released a strong aura. Adil said this was bad, and asked what brought Crade here, realizing he'd kill him if he found out he took Subria's eye, but he wondered why Crade didn't react. Crade asked her if she managed to pass the field, and she answered, yes, sweating with anxiety. Crade said that's good, and told her to follow him. As for Adil, he kept wondering what he was thinking and started following them too. He told himself it was impossible to escape their surveillance, and he no longer had anything to offer the paper, which meant he couldn't use its power anymore. They finally reached the palace. Crade stopped and told everyone to return to their rooms. He ordered Adil to wait here and said he'd summon him later. Adil thought this might be his chance to leave, but he felt someone watching him from between the trees. So he said, no problem, I'll wait inside. In Crade's office, Rennie stood before him. He told her she'd completed his last task and asked if she really wanted to enter the training facility. She said yes, so he looked out the window thoughtfully and asked what she thought of him. The question surprised her, and she remembered how Adil had approached her so quickly. So she said he's strong. He smiled and said he saw it that way and that it was interesting. Then he told her that since she'd proven herself, she could now go to sight like she wanted. She was overjoyed and thanked him. After she left, he said he thought Adil would die the moment he entered the field, but he survived and even took Subria's eye, not to mention Rennie's opinion of him, so he definitely deserved to be used. Meanwhile, Adil was just wondering how long he'd be waiting here. Then at sunset, we saw Adil inside being led by a servant. The servant told Crade he'd brought him. Crade was sitting behind his desk, looking at him. Adil wondered what was going on in his head and asked why he let him live. Crade smiled, called him a bastard, and said he'd tricked his daughter well. Then he released a very strong violet aura that pressed down on Adil so hard he could barely breathe. He collapsed to the ground, saying he knew Crade didn't intend to kill him, Kraid immediately withdrew his aura and said, "That was interesting." Adil said his energy was truly amazing. Kraid told him he was quick-witted and asked his name, and Adil introduced himself. Then Kraid raised his hand, and an aura wrapped around it, lifting Adil into the air and pulling him very close. Adil asked what he wanted from him. Kraid told him to open his mouth, and a small snake appeared flying toward him. Kraid said he just wanted him to finish what he was telling his daughter, and the snake started crawling down his throat. Then Kraid said if any other ideas crossed his mind, the poison would tear his heart apart. He added that he'd prepare a place for him to stay, and that he had to wait until he was summoned. Then he ordered him to leave, but Adil was just wondering what all that was for. After that, he was taken to a house, and the head butler told him he'd be staying here from now on. Adil explains how he became a subordinate of this household because of Kraid's will, but he's at least grateful he let him live. Still, he feels like he's being exploited. Kraid acknowledged him partially, so maybe that's a decent position, but most importantly, he needs to get rid of the thing in his chest. He says he doesn't know if it'll work or not as he restrains it and replaces it with air. He says it worked as he expected, which means the thing wasn't moving. He felt relieved because it wasn't active, and adds that if he'd failed, it would have been truly awful. He knows Kraid will notice if he kills the thing, so he wonders what to do. The creature started to open its eyes. Adil said since it's waking up because the mana that was feeding it got cut off, he has to feed it. He started drawing it to the tip of his finger, telling it that this is all it can eat, and it has no choice but to be satisfied this way. He started talking to it and asked it to go back to sleep, and it actually did, curling up in the little bed he made for it. He sighed, said he could finally relax, and wondered how much longer he was supposed to endure this, feeling like he was on the verge of collapsing. He opened his status screen again and said he had to check it. We see his spatial teleportation ability is now at level 2, but the problem is the amount of mana, because compared to heroes, it's nothing just a drop in an ocean. He asked himself how to increase it and what he should do, then remembered there was a way. The next day, we see Rennie telling him she doesn't like this. Adil asked what she meant and said 3 days had passed since he was assigned as her bodyguard. Her reactions were always cold toward him. When she was younger, she was cheerful, but she changed after her mother was killed by humans, and as the author, Adil felt sorry for her. One of the servants called out to them and said, "Mr. Kraid wanted to see them." The reason the president called them definitely had to do with Rennie joining Sight. Even though she passed the field test, Kraid didn't allow her to go. Kraid told her that Sight isn't an easy place, and with her current abilities, she'd die there after a while without being able to avenge her mother. Adil felt he shouldn't be here, and Rennie started to feel depressed. Then Kraid said if Adil went with her as her bodyguard, he'd allow her to enter the academy, but she shook her head in refusal. Adil wondered why she hated him that much. He explains that Sight is an academy in the demon world where all the elite kids of that world gather. It's basically a demon academy, and was always at odds with the imperial school the hero attended. In the context of his novel, many students die, including Rennie. It's one of the worst places where death seems inevitable for everyone. Rennie's eyes started to tear up, and Adil said he didn't understand why she was so determined to go to a place like that if he were in her shoes. But he stopped and said, maybe it's the best place to gather power. He knows most of the major incidents that will happen between the two schools, the Imperial School and Sight, and decided to take on the experience. He told Kraid he had a request. Kraid looked at him, and Adil said if he was going to be dragged there, he had to make the most of it, and he asked for something related to mana. Kraid laughed and said he thought Adil would ask him to remove the thing in his chest instead. Adil said he definitely shouldn't let him know the poison inside him had actually disappeared. Rennie noticed his trembling, and Kraid called him an arrogant, insolent man, but said the request wasn't difficult, so he'd grant it. Then he asked Rennie to leave, and she bowed and left, but as she walked away, she shot him a sharp look. Adil wondered why she hated the idea of going with him so much, and whether Kraid might give him an elixir or maybe an artifact that wouldn't be bad. Kraid said it's a treasure that family members can react to with sensitivity, which is why he ordered his daughter to leave. Adil was surprised it was a family treasure. Kraid told him he knew his amount of mana was very low, and since he was going to die in his daughter's place, giving him this was the least he could do. Then he told him to come closer, because Kraid would personally transfer the Paris family's mana cultivation technique to Adil. Adil did not expect that at all. Kraid began reciting a chant and said, "O Demon King, grant your servant clarity of mind amid chaos. Bless us with the true vestiges, and do not let the thousands of demons starve, but do not put them to the test." Adil exhaled after the short sermon and the transfer ceremony ended. Kraid said any ordinary person would have lost their mind after hearing that recitation, and that Adil was truly a special person. Thanks to this cultivation technique, mana would be granted to him directly from the demon ruler, and he'd be able to get everything he wished for. Adil was shocked to learn the source of the power was the demon ruler. Kraid told him his family seems to have a connection to the 7 deadly sins. Adil asked what he meant, and Kraid replied that after planting the worm's poison inside him, it no longer mattered whether he was a spy or not. Adil said he didn't remember making the Arsan family part of the 7 deadly sins. Kraid told him he could leave now. Outside in the forest, we saw Adil sitting on a rock meditating. He said he'd train here because his mana might get out of control. He started feeling the energy swirling around him, so he addressed the demon ruler. He explained to himself that once he accepted demonic energy, he wouldn't be able to use human mana anymore, but he had no other choice anyway. We see the demon ruler looking down at him with red eyes and calling him a hybrid. Adil said there's no way that means what he thinks it does. The demon ruler replied that he didn't think Adil carried that child's blood, but he seemed to carry a traitor's blood. Adil asked, "Are you the demon ruler?" He replied, "Yes," and said the world calls him the ruler of pride. Adil asked if he intended to kill him, and the ruler replied that if he intended to, Adil would have died the moment he spoke, but for some reason, he doesn't want to kill him. Adil was surprised but felt relieved. The demon ruler said he sensed that Adil bore the same sin he carried, and he felt a strange kind of familiarity toward him, adding that he would give him a distinguishing mark because he was walking the same path. This mark indicates that he'll bear his power, but he must be careful not to lose control because of pride. Adil said that since he borrowed the demon ruler's power, he gained 3 additional lines thanks to this mark, and the mark is a tattoo. And if this keeps up, his whole body will be covered in tattoos. He sensed someone behind him, so he turned to see who it was, and was surprised to see Rennie watching him from behind a tree. He asked himself what brought her here, and whether she had heard him, but she was blushing and called him the Dark Priest. Adil thought to himself, she's got the wrong idea. At his home, Adil says it's been a month since he got the demon ruler's mark, and his money has skyrocketed. Even though he trained hard, he can't believe his energy doubled in such a short period. It's probably thanks to his focus trait, and within a few years his power will reach a crazy level. In his current state, he could even conquer the hidden field, but he's puzzled why Rennie trains in front of his house instead of going to the training yard. He called out to her, she looked at him and asked what he wanted, then greeted him with extreme respect, which annoyed him. He told her it's good she stopped avoiding him like before, but she misunderstood and thought he was a priest. That makes sense, since those who can communicate with the demon ruler in this world are dark priests. Luckily, she didn't hear the conversation between him and the demon ruler, but if she treated him like he outranked her, ugly rumors would spread in the family. He called out to her again, which surprised her, and he told her he understood what she was thinking, but he was asking her to treat him like she used to. She tried to explain that she couldn't, but he told her he was just following Kraid's orders to protect her, and she should deal with him comfortably. She said if that's the case, she'd try, and immediately asked him to go get some water. He asked her to repeat what she said, and she replied that she was repeating what he said. He was the one who asked her to deal with him comfortably, and she was tired and thirsty after training. He remarked, as expected of the Pride family, their attitude flipped instantly. She ordered him to hurry, and he replied, looks like there's no escaping doing what you ask sometimes. After a while, we see her drinking water. Adil says he needs to speed up taking control of this domain, but Rennie isn't leaving him alone, and he barely has time because he has to act before the main character crosses into the demon realm before him, and he needs these treasures so he can survive in sight. He called out to her again and asked about her preparations for registering in sight. She asked why he suddenly cared, and he told her she'd meet all kinds of bad people there, and he was asking because he was worried about her. She replied that she'd prepared everything. He asked, you sure? And suggested she double-check because he didn't want her getting into trouble later for forgetting something important. She wondered what he was trying to get at and told him to get to the point. He said he was just worried about her since she'd be under his protection, but she accused him of lying and asked what he was trying to pull behind her back. That's when he realized his act wasn't working on her. She started thinking maybe he was getting tired of her. He told himself things were getting worse, then said he'd heard about a domain in this area and had been planning to take it over purely for her safety. She started thinking it over while he hoped she'd buy it. Suddenly, she said she remembered what she forgot. He told her to go back and get it. She said, the warm-up. He was confused and asked what she meant, so she started drawing her sword and said she hadn't warmed up yet, and that she'd go with him to that domain and they might finish it in a day if it was nearby. We find out later that the domain is called the Realm of the Immortals, and he says it used to be under necromancer's control back in the day, but now it's packed with ghost soldiers after the necromancers died in the human versus demon war. Rinny said she knew that. Adil said that was enough to worry Rinny, so it might be at least a mid to high level domain. The number of soldiers had grown, so her help wouldn't be a bad idea. The problem was, moving together would make it really hard for him to sneak out of the castle, and word would reach Crid immediately. He told her it'd be better if she didn't go, if it'd be a burden on her, and if the boss found out she cut him off and said, "No problem, I know a secret exit." They headed toward a wall and we saw a hole underneath it. She said, "There." He commented that she seemed to know the area well. She went quiet for a moment, but he realized she probably escaped from there a lot. He said they'd better move before someone spotted them, and she agreed. As soon as they got out, they headed for a mountain range. Adil asked how much farther. She looked unsure, and he realized he might have messed up and said he never had a reason to leave the place, so he didn't know the surrounding area well. She replied they were almost there and just needed to cross the next range, so he realized that meant they weren't too far. She answered, "Yeah." They stopped suddenly. Then he said, "Looks like we're here." As they looked around, they saw nothing but ruins. She said, "Damn that son of Spiros." He realized she was cursing that's what that word meant in their world, and added that he had to hide from Rinny, that he was of the arson bloodline no matter what, and he was the only one who knew the way to the domain. He said they could get in if they dug here, and she agreed. He remembered he'd written that the entrance was under the biggest stone statue, and that the soldiers with rotting bodies guard the lands. He saw a symbol on the ground and said, "This has to be the entrance," then asked, "Should I go first?" She said she'd take the lead. When they went down, we saw torches on the walls, and the light was brighter than he expected. She told him, "Look ahead," and they saw a church, which meant they were in the right place. Adil said the place was totally different from the Paris domain, and he bet there were at least 100 graves here. Rinny told him it was time to move out, so Adil pulled out a small dagger and said, "All right." A skeleton started crawling up from the ground, and it wasn't alone. Skeletons immediately began surrounding them. Adil said, "I'll leave this to you," and she replied, "All right." She took a deep breath, started unleashing her aura, and dashed through the soldiers, smashing them to pieces. He realized he'd made the right call bringing her along, and added there was definitely a necromancer at the end of this horde. She said, "Got it," and sprinted toward them, and he told her he'd catch up soon. The shattered bones of the soldiers started shaking and reassembling themselves right in front of her. She was shocked and said, "They're coming back to life," we heard the necromancer say. "She must be brave to come here." Then he ordered his soldiers to eliminate the intruders. She realized they'd keep coming back and asked what they should do. Adil said it was because of the necromancer and told her not to stop and to keep pushing forward. She asked what he meant, but suddenly he was ambushed. However, he cut off the skeleton's head and took it down, then said he had an easy way to end this. She said, "Understood," and charged straight at the necromancer. The necromancer screamed and ordered his soldiers to stop them. Adil said they just needed to reach him and then it would all be over. They just had to destroy his energy orb, and added that he could finally use the new ability he got from the spatial swap skill after it evolved. This time, a giant skeletal soldier appeared in front of Rinny, and he realized it wasn't going to be easy. He called out to her, but she screamed, lunged, pierced it with a single strike, and obliterated it. Adil was shocked by that, then used the targeting skill to lock onto the soldier's head, after which he swapped positions to get closer to the necromancer. While flying through the air, he said the new ability let him swap places between objects. We saw him target his sword and activate the ability, and the orb started leaving the necromancer's hand and dropped straight into Adil's hand. He said, "That's badass." The necromancer screamed in disbelief, but Adil crushed the orb with his energy. The necromancer asked in shock, "How did that happen?" And all the soldiers began to fade away. Adil said, "We did it, milady," and she looked thrilled. The necromancer thanked Adil, and Adil said all this tragedy happened because of what he wrote, and he genuinely hoped he could rest in peace now. Rinny called him and asked if there was anything else to do. He told her, "It's reward time," and he was finally going to get something he needed. We saw some loot. One of them was a dagger called Fang of Darkness, which turns darkness into mana and increases agility and speed in dark places. The other was a ring called Eternal Moon, an item that absorbs mana sensitivity and moonlight. Adil said, "Nice," and added that now he could use his darkness-related attribute to the fullest. Then he said the ring was great, but he didn't really need it, and offered her the ring while he'd take the dagger. She said, "All right," he said, "in that case," and suddenly grabbed her hand and started slipping the ring onto her index finger. We saw her start blushing and trembling because she was super nervous. He wondered why she reacted like that, and also wondered if rings had a different meaning to demons. He asked her what she thought, and at that moment we saw the ring glowing around her finger while she spaced out and said, "It's amazing." He replied that he was glad she liked it, then said, "Since I took down the boss, I'll take all the gold." But she immediately set her sword beside him and gave him a sharp look. He laughed and said he meant he'd split it evenly, down to the last coin. After they finished clearing the domain, they went back to the castle, and there he spent his time doing Rinny's tasks or training his mana. A full month passed like that, and we saw that he'd gained more mana during that time. He said his progress was very satisfying. 350 mana points put him around the middle tiers in the demon realm. A few days later, Crid summoned Adil and Rinny to his office. He said it was time to enter sight. Ikrid continued, saying they were heading to the capital today to enroll in the academy, and asked if they'd finished their preparations. Both of them replied, yeah. He told them they should set off now. He didn't see any point in a send-off party. Rinny hesitated for a moment, then bowed to her father, and Adil bowed too and said he would accompany her. Crid called out to him and said he hoped he'd achieve good results. Adil answered, yeah. Then Crid stood watching them as they got into the carriage. The driver said they would depart immediately, and Crid was still watching from above. Adil looked up and said, he said he didn't want a send-off, but I guess even demons feel something for their kids. Despite his worries about the future, he decided that things had come to this point, so he would achieve his goals in sight. As the horses set off, the road was a bit rough. Adil noticed Rinny hadn't said a word since they left, and wondered if he'd done something wrong. She looked at him and thought to herself, I didn't like him at first because he looked shady, but he's more handsome than I expected. Adil laughed nervously and said, nice weather today, huh? She thought to herself that even though there's nothing dignified about his words or actions, he doesn't come off as strongly as he should. She wondered to herself if he was really a priest. As for Adil, all he cared about was figuring out why she kept looking at him like that. She sighed and told herself that was a silly thought. She'd seen him herself talking to the demon lord, so she shouldn't doubt him. Adil told himself he must have done something wrong. Then she looked at the ring on her finger, and her cheeks started to redden as she gazed out the window. She said this ring represents an eternal vow. That's what it means when someone of the opposite sex puts a ring on someone's finger in the demon world. And since he did that without saying anything, she wondered what kind of vow it was and felt curious. Adil called out to her and said they'd arrive within an hour, which was earlier than expected. She seemed a bit annoyed that he didn't say anything more than that, but she let it go and said, okay. Adil was confused and wondered if he'd done something wrong or what. She told him to be quiet because she wanted to take a nap. They finally arrived, and Adil was looking at the city with its crowded streets. He said this was the capital of the demon realm, and it didn't look much different from the human world, kinda medieval looking. But there were differences, like people here having horns and other physical traits. As for elite demons, they had noticeable tattoos, and one of them had a tattoo on his neck just like Adil's. Renee asked him why he was walking so slowly, and told him to speed up. He said, sure, then asked where they were going now. She replied that the entrance exam would be at noon in 2 days, but they had to register first. He said if there were still 2 days left, they should hang out in the capital until then, but she said she wasn't in the mood. He wondered why everything here felt so awkward, and said maybe she was homesick. He was about to ask her more, but she cut him off and said there was no time to chatter, and they had to go register. He thought to himself that he'd heard her story was that she hadn't left home since her mother died, and he just couldn't understand her. As they walked, he said this sight place looked amazing, definitely 3 times bigger than any regular university. A guy with an egg-shaped head told someone they were registered and had to come back in 2 days, then called for the next person. Adele said they were here to register. Egghead guy looked confused and asked Adele if he was a demon, because he didn't look like one, then angrily asked if he was a half-demon and was seriously applying, adding that even if they lost the war, he wondered what kind of place he thought he was dealing with. Adele shot back that he could imagine a bleak future if someone as ugly as him was going to treat him like that. Egghead guy kept insulting him, so Renee asked what was going on. He looked at her, saw her horn, and said, no way. I didn't expect to see someone from one of the 7 deadly sins houses. He went on to say that if she was the applicant, she had to state her house and identity. She answered, House of Paris, my name is Renee, and this is my bodyguard, who will be enrolling with me. Egghead guy said that if they were letting a half-demon be a personal guard, then the standards of the 7 deadly sins houses had really fallen, and he couldn't believe Sayate would accept one of them. Renee cut him off and said, that's enough. I'm not going to stand here and watch you insult the House of Paris any further. Egghead guy said he wasn't discriminating against the applicants' identities, and asked her to forget what he said, then asked for Adele's house and identity. Adele lied. House of Pixie, my name is Adele, but Egghead guy said registration was done and they could come back in 2 days. Adele explained that in the human-demon war, half-demons were stronger and fought with the humans, so it was natural the others would hate them. He was annoyed, but there wasn't anything he could do about it. He told Renee they needed to find a place to stay, but she was still upset. We see them standing in front of a building, and he said, "This looks good enough." She replied, "The buildings here are really old." He told her there wasn't anything they could do since they had no money. The 10 coins Cred gave them would barely last them a month. After the war, the House of Paris became poor, so they couldn't ask for more. He asked if they should go in now. As soon as they entered, the clerk welcomed them. Adele asked if there was a room for 2 people for 2 days. The clerk said yes, but asked if they were staying in the same room, which froze Renee in place. From embarrassment, like steam was coming out of her head. Adele said he wanted 2 separate rooms. The man said the price would be 2 gold pieces for 2 rooms for 2 days, and the rooms were on the 2nd floor. Adele said that amount was about 200,000 won, so not bad. Renee said she'd head up first. Looking a little disappointed, he told her he'd bring the bags later and wished her a good rest. She was still a bit reserved, but told him to rest too. He thought to himself that she'd lived her whole life in a huge mansion, so this was probably her first time sleeping in a place like this, but she'd get used to it soon. As for him, he said he needed to rest up for the next 2 days. The scene shifted to the academy, and one of the soldiers was shouting for all applicants to enter and follow instructions. Adele said there were so many people, and wondered if there were at least 100. He couldn't believe there were that many applicants who wanted to beat the humans. He realized he had to be careful so his identity wouldn't be exposed. Someone announced that from this point on, everyone needed to hold on to their ID card and head out in order. Adele wondered what they meant by head out, and suddenly a train pulled into the station. Adele said he never saw that coming. One of the officials said there were multiple labyrinth-like dimensional gates set up to block intruders, and no one could reach Syed except by that train. Adele figured the huge fortress they'd seen was just part of the place, not the academy itself. He was amazed at how big this place was. As they sat, an announcement said they'd arrive at Saite soon and should brace for the impact. Adele looked stunned, and when he finally opened his eyes, he saw the academy. The train stopped, they started getting off, and they were told to head to the grand hall for the exam. As they walked, Adele and Renee saw tons of people getting off the train. Adele said, "This place is so huge, it's a bit overwhelming." Most of the people here were young demons, but he wondered if there were other heirs to the 7 deadly sins. He spotted a few people in distinctive outfits and said they weren't students, they looked like teachers. He thought if he could make a good impression on them, life here might get easier. Renee said time was up, and as the doors closed, the lights went out. He said, "It was daytime just a moment ago," and wondered if it was some kind of magic effect, and he had no idea what the exam would be. Then we heard a woman's voice telling everyone to be quiet. When the light hit her, everyone looked up at her as she stared them down. She welcomed them to Saite and called them a bunch of brainless idiots, saying she couldn't believe there were so many people eager to die this year. Adele couldn't believe how much pressure there was in just her voice. Then she started laughing and said that was enough small talk, and they'd start the entrance exam immediately. As she began to release her aura, Adele worried about Renee, but she told him he needed to focus on the exam. The people around them started choking and dropping to their knees, and the teachers were watching the students. One of the teachers told his colleague that the headmistress had a strange taste and asked what he thought. He replied, "It doesn't matter how talented you are, if your mental strength is weak, you're useless." There was a reason the headmistress personally oversaw the first stage of the entrance exam, called the mental endurance test, namely to make sure the applicants could endure interrogation and keep secrets if the humans captured them. Then the man said 5 minutes had passed, and most of them had dropped, and that should be enough for now. Except for 8 people, everyone else had fallen. She had high expectations since the number of applicants was big. The man said about 40% lasted more than 5 minutes compared to the previous cycle, which was a lot. She said that was reassuring, and added that this batch included all heirs of the 7 deadly sins houses, and the rumors might be true since that many applicants endured. He said that made sense, but told her to wait, then wondered, "Who's that boy? He doesn't look like one of the heirs." She said, "That's true, but he still stayed conscious the whole time like the others, though at this rate he won't last long, since they saw him on his knees." The man realized something unusual was happening. Adele started giving off an evil red aura that shocked the teachers and drew the attention of the headmistress, Lucien. They realized the situation was dangerous, and Adele began unleashing his energy in front of everyone. One of the teachers grabbed his sword and said they had to take him out here and now, adding, "At first there was nothing special about him, but suddenly the air around him changed and he released a cold, emotionless killing intent, like he was picking a flower or squashing a bug. It's not the primitive killing intent you get from beasts, it's the killing intent carried by the worst killers." That made all the teachers look at him, and his reaction was faster than they realized. Lucien looked at him, which made him wonder because he felt nervous. And that was wrong, he shouldn't feel that way, facing just an exam applicant. The other teacher smiled at him, people were still dropping, and Adele was standing. Adele said he was about to lose it, and needed to find a way to endure this. That was just before it happened. He said, maybe if he used his killing intent, it might be enough to counter the aura, and he had no other choice. So he started screaming as he released that intent. Lucien said they were enduring very well, and that her aura would get a bit harsher. Adele started laughing and said he could take more. Their auras started clashing, but in reality her aura was what was dissipating around him. She was surprised by that, and Adele was panting, trying to catch his breath. Then he said it actually worked and he felt much better now. He wondered how Renee was doing, and when he looked at her, he saw she was trembling but still standing. He said she was holding up well, as expected. He added that the 7 deadly sins heirs were also withstanding it well. Then they were introduced to us. The heir of envy was Bolton, the heir of lust was Ran, the heir of gluttony was Samuel, the heir of sloth was Aaron, and the heir of greed was Jawar. Adele says some of these characters were written with real affection, but their fate is to die at the hands of the main cast. 6 of them, including Renee, will be killed. Then he notices something that catches his eye and says, long white hair, red eyes, and a crown of thorns. No doubt, that's the worst villainess in the future of the demon world. That's the demon lady and the heir of wrath, Diana. Suddenly the aura stops, and the first test is over. Adele explains that the Demon King usually comes from the House of Wrath, and there's no logical reason for her to be here after all. The successor to the Demon King doesn't need to come to Saiti as an applicant to pass the exams, and he wonders if something happened that he doesn't know about. Some students start yelling, asking how they could have failed, and go, what kind of test is this? They must know who our parents are. One of them screams to see the principal, but someone grabs his head like a basketball and tells him, I don't care who your father is, got it? Then he's thrown to the ground, and they tell him, I won't repeat myself. If you couldn't handle 5 minutes in the first test, you're useless here. Then it's announced that those who failed are disqualified, and the guards are ordered to shut the gates. Adil says Saith is really ruthless, but luckily he passed the test. And now that he thinks about it, that girl is actually the academy director, and he remembers seeing her before. She's one of the strongest figures in the demon world, despite her cute appearance. Then she steps forward and introduces herself as Lucien. Adil says he was lucky to pass the first test, but he needs to be more careful because he could fail at any moment, especially since the number of people who pass the second test will be fewer. He hears people talking about Rini and notices she seems really famous. He says that makes sense, since they're all heirs to the 7 deadly sins, and managed to endure killing intent, but no one's noticing him even though he endured it too. Still, Rinia congratulates him and tells him he did a good job. He replies that he was just lucky, but he figures he should at least be satisfied that he left the impression he's not just an ordinary applicant, and he's confident the instructors and the director will remember him. Then a teacher yells to get everyone's attention, and the trainer steps forward. His name is Ares, and he has a tattoo on his neck. Adil comments that he looks like the type who always carries a switchblade in his pocket. Ares congratulates them on passing the first test, and says they proved strong mental fortitude because that test was a simulation of a situation where they'll be tortured by humans in the future. He adds that the 8 applicants who held out till the end will get bonus points, and if they perform well in the second test too, they'll be allowed to enter the weapons department. Adil says that's a huge stroke of luck and feels grateful he decided to endure to the end, and he can feel everyone's jealousy. Ares announces he'll explain the second test now, where they'll showcase their abilities, especially the skills and weapons they can use against humans. The class they're assigned to may depend on the results of this test, so they need to keep that in mind. Adil says he definitely means they'll be placed in the appropriate class based on the weapons and skills they use, and he wonders what kind of humans they'll be facing. Ares says he'll show them now who their opponent will be for the second test. Then he raises his fingers and snaps them, and a blue aura starts forming from his hands. Something begins to materialize in the middle of that violent aura, and we see a man dressed like a tiger, holding a weapon. Adil recognizes him immediately and says, that's the strongest hero among the heads of the 6 great families, and his name is Nina Sile. Sile starts releasing a blue aura, and Adil asks himself what a human like that is doing here. This is unexpected. Rini asks him if he knows who that is, and of course he does. He's the head of House Nina and someone closely tied to the protagonist of the original story. Not just closely tied, his lineage is known from birth. He's the protagonist's father, the sword saint who built the strongest house with talent alone. The others recognize him and say he's the sword saint, and it looks like they're trying to cut them down from the start. Adil says that makes sense, they really are trying to do that, especially since he's defeated a lot of demon houses before. Ares tells them he obviously doesn't expect them to withstand the Sword Saint's full power, so he'll only use 10% of his strength, because if he used his full power, they wouldn't have any chance of survival. Rini says 10% sounds easy, but Adil replies that's not true at all. No matter how weak you make it, a monster is still a monster, and 10% of his power could easily level an entire city. He wonders how they're supposed to pass such a brutal exam. There must be a certain passing criterion. He wishes he could use the information scroll, but he doesn't have enough money, and the number of questions he can ask is limited. Ares says at their current levels they can't face him alone, so they'll be split into teams to keep it fair. The top 8 will be placed in separate spots, and the rest will be assigned randomly. Adil says it looks like he won't be able to rely on someone to carry him this time, but the students start staring at Rini, wanting her to carry them this time, and others stare at Adil. He says he's used to it. They think he's just some lucky guy. Then Rini touches his shoulder and asks him to pass and come back safe. He replies and wishes her good luck too. Ares starts calling the groups, and we find out Adil is in group 33, and his teammates are Kina, Chris, and Sans. Adil says he doesn't know who they are. They might be minor characters without a big role in the original story. We see them standing in front of Adil, so he introduces himself. Chris introduces himself and Kina, while Sanchez looks angry and asks why a half-demon is the team leader, saying it's an insult to his family. Adil says he can't believe it. Even the minor characters are looking down on him with contempt, and there's no way this guy thinks his house is that important. Then he tells them they all have to do their best, and Chris and Kina agree. He says they need to assign roles and wants to know what weapons and abilities they use, starting with Chris. Chris says his ability is mana conversion, and he can summon a triangular prism and turn it into a shield or a sword. He doesn't have high killing power, but he's versatile. Adil says that's not bad at all and he'll pass the test. Then he tells Kina it's her turn. Kina says she's more of a support type than a fighter. Adil asks if she means support abilities, and she goes, yeah, and gives an example by praying to the Demon King to increase her allies' speed. When she starts chanting, Adil starts to feel the buff. She asks how it is, and if he feels lighter, even though the effect was barely noticeable. He says, I guess, so she calls him harsh while blushing. He laughs and says he was just kidding and asks her not to take it to heart. Then he says her ability is better than nothing, but it's really weak, he could barely feel it, and he doesn't know how she passed the first test. After that, he asks Sanchez about his abilities, and Sanchez says it's better to show him. He starts forming rocks around his body, and Adil comments that hardening is perfect for a tank role. Then Sanchez asks Adil to show his abilities. Adil uses the position swap skill and switches places to appear right in front of Sanchez's face, which surprises him. Adil explains it's a teleportation ability. Sanchez starts sweating, realizing he could have been killed in that moment. Kina and Chris say the ability looks amazing, and Adil thanks them for the compliment. He adds that he doesn't know what variables might pop up, so he doesn't want to reveal his true abilities right now. Then he explains that positioning should be simple. Chris and Sanchez, who are good at defense, will be in front, he'll be in the middle, and Kina will support from the back. He asks if they agree. Kina says, yeah, and Sanchez mumbles his agreement from behind. Ares announces it's time for the second test, and every group needs to get ready. Adil says, finally, things are getting started. The first group steps forward, and even though they're facing the Sword Saint, their eyes are full of excitement. His sword moves like it's in slow motion, but suddenly he wipes out all 4 members in an instant, shocking everyone. Some of them start screaming, and Adil says he couldn't even see his movement, asking himself if this is really just 10% of his power. Then Ares calls the second group, and they get crushed too. Then the third, and Kina and Chris look worried. Then the fourth. Some members of the fourth group refuse to enter the fight, saying it's pointless and they don't want to lose points. Ares looks at them coldly and says they can skip the test, and asks if the other 2 will continue. They say they'll try, which surprises Adil that they're determined to give it a shot. He says what he's thinking might be the right idea, but as usual he doesn't spell out what it is. Chris asks if they really don't have to take the test, and Adil replies, of course not. It's neither wanted after putting into using Dilhalsiv them. Now the 2 remaining members of the fourth group are standing in front of Sile. Adil says handling him with just 2 people is impossible and wants to observe a bit longer, but they're immediately taken out by long-range aura strikes. Adil comments that if that had been real sword aura, they would have been sliced in half. Chris asks if they can really beat a monster like that. Sanchez replies, there's no reason to fear a mere human, even though he's shaking with fear. Adil laughs at that. The 5th group gets taken out, and things speed up from the 6th to the 9th. The 10th group withdraws, then they keep going up to the 30th group. Adil says, by the time they got to the 30th group, 5 groups had withdrawn, and not a single group managed to land a meaningful hit on the Sword Saint. This is a fight against an unbeatable opponent, and there are no restrictions on withdrawing midway. But it's not all bad, because this time we see them blocking the attack, and Chris looks surprised. Adil says the further they go, the longer the fights last and the better their skills are compared to the earlier applicants, and now he understands the real condition to pass the second test. Sanchez says their turn is coming up, and Chris replies that he's scared. Adil tells them he figured out how to pass. Sanchez asks what he means. Adil answers that the criteria are that even if they lose to overwhelming power, they have to get up and keep fighting to the end. Based on how the instructors treat those who withdraw, and on how strong the Sword Saint is, he's sure of it. Sanchez is about to say something, but Adil cuts him off, then Ares interrupts them by calling Group 33. Adil says they need to defeat the Sword Saint because, with their strength, they can do it. Sanchez asks if he's serious, but Chris and Kina react to the idea and say it doesn't matter if they lose. Adil says it doesn't matter if he's a half-demon or not. With his talent, he can beat the strongest villain. The team lines up in a combat formation, and Adil says it's time to begin. Unlike the main character, Adil doesn't have much information about Sile because he didn't specify much when creating him, and he wonders what to do now. He tells them not to get nervous and to fight from their positions. Chris says okay, but Sanchez replies he knew that from the start. The Sword Saint's aura starts moving around his body, and Adil shouts, "No, he's coming." Sile swings his sword upward, shatters Chris's barrier completely, and sends him flying. Sanchez manages to hold his ground, and Adil orders Kina to protect Chris. She replies she'll do it because she needs to mitigate the impact of his fall. Then Adil tells Sanchez it's his turn, and Sanchez shouts, "I know." The next strike comes, and Sanchez takes it with his body right away, but he manages to block it. After holding off the attack, Adil says that's good, and that he noticed a gap before the second strike, but it's so obvious his gut tells him it's a trap, and he wonders if Sale has some kind of AI. Adil tells them the second strike is coming now, and they have to get back to their positions. Chris steps forward again, and we see his barrier is cracked now, which means it's about to break, and Sanchez's arm is cracking too, all from a single hit. Adil asks Sanchez to hold on a bit longer. While Sale launches his next attack, Adil says, it's the same pattern. Chris gets thrown back again, and Sanchez tries to block the blow with his arms, but his transformation is starting to fade because the attack is getting stronger. Sanchez asks what he's waiting for and says, they'll all die if this keeps up. Adil replies, they just have to hold on a little longer. Sanchez calls him insane, but Adil says they're the only team that blocked the second strike and wonders if Sile will use the same pattern again. Sile raises his sword toward them, then slams it straight into the ground and slashes with both hands in a terrifying double strike. The air around them starts to change, and Adil realizes something. Chris is on the ground and Kina is treating him, so Adil walks over and asks if he's okay. Chris says he knows it's tough, but he has to trust him once more. Chris looks like he's in pain and asks Sanchez what Adil is doing, while Sile is about to attack again. Chris asks if Adil has a plan. Adil answers, of course I'll stab my sword down his throat, obviously, then gives a truly wicked smile. Kina and Chris look at him worriedly. Then Cylon begins preparing his third attack, and the aura around him intensifies. Sanchez shouts a warning that the attack is coming, and tells Chris to get back up front. Adil tells him he'll have to withstand this one without a barrier. Sanchez asks what he means by that. The moment the third strike lunges in, and before Sanchez can brace, he suddenly loses his form and flies into the air. At that moment, Adil links himself to him with his swapping ability, so they switch places, and now Adil is directly above Sile. Then Adil links himself to his sword and swaps places again, bringing the airborne sword back. Adil returns holding his dagger, and now that Sile is unarmed, he says this is his chance to kill him. The attack is about to land. Shock crosses Eris and Rennie's faces too, but in fact, Seal had just kicked Adil hard in the chest a moment before he wasn't going to stab him in the throat. Adil starts coughing up blood and says he has to hold on. He then activates his ability, and darkness begins to swirl around them, forming a small cocoon. He says if not for Chris's barrier, his guts would have exploded. The swap failed, but at least he trapped Seal in a pitch-black space with no trace of light. Seal can barely see, but Sile has the Dark Fang, and in that space he's stronger than any weapon and will fight with everything he's got. Seal moves his head a little and then immediately charges toward Adil, cutting through the darkness, which surprises Adil a lot, so he says, this guy's a real monster. We see Adil raise his hands in the air and smile, because that was part of his plan. The Dark Fang begins circling in the air behind Sile, but that's not the only attack. There are many other strikes. Adil says, this time you fell into my trap, and addresses the Sword Saint, saying, the end has come. Many fangs of darkness start emerging from small cracks, and Adil clenches his hand and activates the Black Blade Rain, stabbing the Sword Saint from all sides. The cocoon slowly starts to disappear. Chris and the others ask what's happening inside, and Eris says it's almost over. As the darkness fades, Adil steps forward, emerging from the dark ability to reveal Sayle's corpse lying face down on the ground. Everyone is stunned, and a complete silence falls over the hall. Adil smiles and says, "Silence means I did something good." Bolton comments that was entertaining. Chris and Kina run to Adil and say what he did was amazing, asking how he pulled it off. Adil replies, "It was thanks to everyone working together," and asks about Sanchez. Kina says he's in shock, but the teachers are helping him recover. Adil says, "That's reassuring," then adds, "It's time to finish this." They ask what he means, everything's already over. Adil then stabs Seal's corpse. His legs begin to tremble. Chris asks, "What are you doing?" And Adil says, "We have to make sure he's really dead." Eris watches the situation intently. Then Rand laughs and says, "As for hybrids, he is," and one of her fans chimes in, "To you, he's nothing special." Rand laughs and replies, "Of course he was born inferior, and his true nature will show no matter what he tries." She then notices Rennie looking at her with a furious glare. Rand asks herself, "What's up with her?" and notices Rennie's horns and links them to the Paris family. But she still doesn't understand why Rennie is staring like that, and admits that the situation is starting to scare her a bit. Some misunderstand and say this was expected from the heirs of the 7 deadly sins, and that they're basically in a psychological scare contest. Her first fan jumps in and says, "Clearly the victory will be Rand's. That other girl isn't even fit to be a light snack." At that moment, Adil sees Rennie from afar and wonders why she radiates so much violence and aggression. Eris approaches Adil, and when Adil turns to him and asks what he wants, Eris asks if Adil is saying all this because he truly doesn't know the truth. Adil says he has no idea. Eris turns and says he'll be watching him from now on. Adil comments that he thought he'd get a compliment or something, but instead, he lived the most embarrassing moment of his life, and adds that Eris might simply be autistic. While Rand and Rennie glare at each other, Adil comments that he can't believe they're still at it, and now he's on Rennie's side. He asks about the girl standing opposite her, and starts saying that based on her hair and the horns visible on her exposed forehead, she's from the Lust House and her name is Laurel Ran, but he's surprised why she'd pick a fight with Rennie here. He's been so busy with the human world stuff that he's completely ignorant of demon world events. Laurel notices him among the crowd and begins looking his way, then screams and calls him a hybrid. Adil is surprised and asks to himself why she's calling him that. She tells him he must be her slave. At that moment, Rennie suddenly lunges and draws her sword, about to attack Laurel. Laurel looks shocked and starts pulling out her weapon, asking herself if she's gone mad. Eris shouts and orders everyone to stop, stressing that pointless fights are banned in sight, and they must solve personal problems outside this place. Adil feels relieved that Eris handled it and says it's good nothing bad happened between them before the entrance ceremony. Rennie walks away upset, but Laurel comments she might not be in her right mind. Adil asks if she's okay and reminds her that her group is up next, so she needs to prepare. Rennie walks over to him and wipes the sweat from her brow, telling him he did a good job. Laurel starts asking about the nature of their relationship and whether Rennie is actually dating half-demons. Adil replies he's behaving better now after getting through the test and thanks her. Rennie tells him she thinks he hid his power to pretend weakness and asks if she's mistaken, but before he can dodge the question with words, Group 34 is summoned, and she says she has to go but won't tell anyone. Adil says he used all his power to get through and asks if he really looks that weak. It's clear she still remembers he was a priest affiliated with the family. Laurel shouts again and demands that Adil say his name. He asks if she's talking to him, and she says yes. He tells her his name. She says it's not bad, and asks what she wants from him. She starts releasing her aura and says they crossed paths before, demanding he leave the Paris girl and serve her instead, telling him he'll witness her insane charm and that she'll steal and crush those stupid noses. Adil replies he's fine but needs to watch Rennie and can talk later. Laurel gets flustered and asks herself why her plan failed. He's completely distracted, wondering if he'll be able to see Rennie's full power, ignoring Laurel entirely. He wonders how strong Rennie really is, because he has high expectations for the other heirs of the 7 deadly sins. While she and Sale stood face to face releasing their auras, Adil comments she's much stronger than he imagined. Rennie starts advancing alone, catching Diana's attention. Bolton says she's entertaining too. Adil can't believe she's walking straight toward the Sword Saint, and wonders what she's thinking as she stands directly in front of him. They stare at each other, their auras still radiating, which then dim for a moment as Rennie bares her fangs. The atmosphere gets extremely tense between them, and before the Sword Saint can launch his attack, Rennie cuts his body in half with a single strike. Adil looks shocked as she steps back and leaves the bottom half standing. The crowd screams wildly, and Eris says, "Not bad." Adil says, "No." Rand says it's a pity she didn't get to see herself being humiliated by the Sword Saint, but Rennie, at least, should be capable at that level if she intended to confront her. Adil asked, "Does this mean all the heirs of the 7 deadly sins could defeat the real Sword Saint?" Rand replied, "No one can do that right now, and maybe if the previous Demon King were still alive it would be different." But Adil said, "If these kids have even just 10% of the Sword Saint's power, then when they grow up, they'll be much stronger than him." Rana asked if he was teasing her and said anyone with eyes can see, this doesn't even represent a tenth of the Sword Saint's real power. Adil replied that if that's true, it means he struggled against a fake version that didn't equal even 1/10 of the real one, and that he might be the writer of that world but knows nothing about the demon world, yet the anticipation makes his heart beat fast, and he can't wait to see what happens. Only the heirs of the 7 deadly sins remain, and maybe because of Rennie's test effect, the other kids also defeated the Sword Saint very easily. The battles were one-sided to the point it was hard to distinguish power levels among the heirs, but he knows who the strongest among them all is, so there's no need to worry. Eris shouted that the entrance tests are over, and asked everyone to gather in front of the platform because they'll announce the results of the second test. He said everyone who participated in the battle passed, whether they won or lost. Adil commented, "Just as I expected." Eris told everyone who passed that they did a great job. They're officially members of SITE and also official trainees, but they shouldn't celebrate too much, because the road ahead will be hellish, and they'll wish they'd given up. Eris continued that everyone who passed must attend the acceptance ceremony in 2 days, but asked the 8 who defeated the Sword Saint to remain in their places. Rennie was surprised and asked why, and Adele said maybe they planned to reward them by letting them enter the armory that was mentioned in the first test. Eris said they all passed the test with distinction, and as promised, they'd get a chance to enter the armory. Bolton raised his hand and said he had a question. Eris told him to go ahead. Bolton asked if they could take many weapons out because those would definitely be very useful. Adele commented, "Expected that from Lycan Bolton. Son of Envy, his curiosity knows no bounds. He had a decent presence in my story." Eris replied, "No, it'll be hard to focus if someone's carrying multiple weapons, so only one weapon is allowed, and we're short on time so I won't answer further questions." Then he told them to follow him to the armory. Eris went to a wall and began pumping mana into it and said, "This is the feature SITE offers you. Whether you choose the best or worst option, the choice is yours." Adel looked at the armory door and asked, "Why does it look like a prison entrance?" Eris explained they'll go in one by one, in the reverse order of the second entrance test, and as a precaution, each person will be searched while outside. Bolton laughed and said, "That means I'll be the first in and I'll get the best for sure." Eris shouted at him, "Shut up and go in now." Adel thought he would have done the same, but worried that if everyone acted like that, there might be nothing good left by his turn. Bolton came out holding a crown and said it was really awesome. Adel remarked, "As I expected, everyone comes out with artifacts. Maybe I'll choose a shield instead of a weapon." Rennie told him it was his turn, and he noticed she had picked a bracelet. He asked about its properties. She replied he'd know when he went in because everything there has descriptions. He asked what she meant. She said most items are actually described, but there are a few things without descriptions. He asked if that meant it had no value. She said she wouldn't rule that out because they take care of those items, and she was sure something special was in them. Eris said he was the last and looked at Adele. "If you have something to say, speak now." Adele answered, "From your expression, you don't want me to say anything." Then he asked, "What does it mean if a piece has no description?" Eris replied that it means they haven't discovered exactly what it is yet. Adel said, "You mean they don't know who owned it or what kind of abilities it has?" Eris confirmed that and added that if you're lucky you might get a piece with legendary powers, but if you're unlucky, you might get a cursed piece that will haunt you the rest of your life. Then he said time was running out, and he had to go in. Adele guessed that it all depends on whether entering is actually a good thing in the end. When he entered, he noticed the inside was lit and tidy, and he just hoped nothing scary would surprise him. Suddenly he saw a bright light and said, "It must be from that door." When he went in he saw a bunch of glass displays and said, "This is insane." Then he noticed a spear and said, "This spear looks really unique." He decided to read its description, "Twin Fang Spear, used for hunting serpents." The description said the souls of serpents killed by this spear still linger, and when mana is pumped into it, double serpent forms appear. Adel said, "The description makes it seem important, but its abilities aren't impressive, and since I already have daggers, I don't need it." After that he looked at something called Starlight Crystal, a crystal ball filled with starlight once used by a skilled astrologer. By pumping a small amount of mana, he could borrow starlight to illuminate his surroundings. Adele said, "This doesn't suit me much since I use the darkness element. Maybe I can use it as a lamp." Then he noticed an empty space and wondered what piece was here. It had been called Crown of the Great Victor, granting exceptional healing and endurance that lasts until its owner dies. He said, "That's the piece Bolton was wearing, damn him, he's really greedy." He added that Bolton removed the pieces tied to his story and didn't think he'd find one of them here. He concluded that probably most of the good artifacts were already taken. The Serpent Band is gone, the Devil General's banner is gone, and so on. He said, "There's nothing good left. The 7 deadly sins took all the nice pieces." He wondered what to do because most of the armor and weapons were either boring or bad. He glanced at a sword and said, "I have no other choice, but if this is a cursed artifact, it'll be a disaster." Suddenly, he remembered he had something useful, so he pulled out a scroll and said, "Even though I need to save my gold, spending a little now is acceptable." He asked Arson, "Tell me about the broken sword that has no description in the armory." Arson told him he had to pay the usual price for that information. Adele said to wait a bit, then started to understand what was happening, so he asked about the worn scroll beside him and was offered a lower price. He figured that, since the scroll tells him the price, all he had to do was choose the item that demanded the highest price. There were 7 boxes without descriptions, so he decided to ask about them in order. One was eagle-shaped and cost 1 gold coin. Adele laughed at that because the scroll said the owner's wealth transfers ill luck to others. The next one cost 100 gold coins, the next 50. Adele sighed and said, "Nothing good in them. Only 2 are left. One cost 300 gold coins." And he said, "That's an epic grade piece. It's probably the best, must take it." But suddenly, he felt a strange sensation prick him. There was a weird feeling coming from a necklace placed on the side, making him feel like someone was watching him. Then he remembered there was another piece he hadn't accounted for. He wondered if these were Adele's original senses. He asked about the unnamed necklace, and the scroll began shining intensely. Adele was puzzled why it was acting like that, and the paper said he must offer a sacrifice to a certain ruler because the thing radiated a powerful aura. Adele asked, "So this is a legendary item?" and began sweating. He thought his end had come, but unexpectedly his luck hit him incredibly. The scroll began to fall, so Adel said it was too early to celebrate, and wondered which ruler he was supposed to present now. He didn't even have a simple ruler, let alone a demon lord. He wondered what exactly the necklace was. He decided to try pumping some mana into it, but there was no response at all. He said, "This is frustrating. If only I knew what it could do. All it does is ask me to offer a ruler and nothing else. Maybe I'll try a few tricks." He asked, "What ruler is connected to this necklace in the basement?" And all he was told was, "Offer a ruler." He said, "Even if I change how I phrase the question, I'll probably get the same answer." He hesitated to give up, but removed the bottle from the box and said he was sure the necklace was worth much more than any ordinary artifact. His instincts confirmed it. To be sure, he opened his status screen and saw it full of question marks. He said, "Just as I expected," and added, "No one else will care about it anyway, and I can take my time discovering its true nature." When he left, Aris asked him about his necklace. Adel answered it was one of the items without a description. Aris said it was hard to believe he chose an item without knowing what it did or what it was, and insisted that he must know something about it. But Adele said he didn't know anything at all. Aris looked at him suspiciously. Adel wondered why he hated that look, but Aris surprised him by saying, "I believe you," and continued, "As a sight instructor, I must trust my students. Now be careful with the artifacts you picked during dire times. They could save your life." Adele thought that everyone here could one day be leaders in the demon world, gaining a lot of support and investment in the future, and he wished he could get some of that support too. He wondered if he could succeed at that. Aris announced the end of the meeting and told them they'd meet again at the academy's opening ceremony. Adele told Rennie they should return to the dorms, and she agreed. As they left, Bolton called after him laughing, "Was I very rude when we first met?" Then he introduced himself and said Adel's fighting style was amazing. Adele replied, "Nice to meet you," and introduced himself as well. Adele thought the meeting came out of nowhere, but it was good since Bolton had started it. Suddenly, Adel was surprised because Bolton was squeezing his hand hard. He thought he didn't understand what the man was doing. Then he remembered Bolton was the type who didn't care about the weak, showing concern only when driven by jealousy and greed. He said that once he pushed the hero and the human world to the brink of ruin, but when he realized his strength, he postponed the fight for another day and said they would fight again later. In short, he was obsessed with battles. Bolton said, "You look like you're struggling. What's wrong?" Adele replied, "Nothing," and asked why Bolton had come to him specifically when stronger people were nearby. Adele tied himself to Bolton's sword and swapped places with him, which surprised Bolton. Adele said he wanted to stop there because everyone was exhausted after the test, and he couldn't even reach his dagger from the pain in his hand. Bolton started laughing like a madman, and said he didn't expect that Adel was so strong he wanted to fight him here and now to the death. Adele answered no, and reiterated that, as he said before, he didn't intend to fight. Rennie shouted, "Stop," and said if he wants to fight her guardian, he'd have to fight her too. Bolton looked at her and said that as much as he loved fighting, a fight with both of them would be too much, and he didn't want to get hurt before classes started. He added he was sure there'd be many chances, and they'd meet again next time. Adele was baffled and said, "How can he say he doesn't want to get hurt when he wanted a fight to the death? This guy is totally insane." He added that after seeing him in person, he still couldn't understand him. At that moment, Bolton was still trying to figure out how Adel had pulled his sword from his hand. Rini told Adel they had to go, and he agreed, saying today was only the first day, but it felt like days had passed and he already looked forward to life at the academy. Back in the rooms, Adele opened the window feeling a great relief, and thought maybe it was because of the hardships he faced yesterday, but today he felt fully awake, his body better, and felt himself growing stronger. He said he'd try on the uniform that had been sent to him. The place where he lived shows great respect to those who wear that uniform. After putting it on, he said the uniform was more comfortable than expected, and he was told he wasn't allowed to wear anything other than the uniform for 3 years, but he thought at least it was practical. Adele gave Rennie her uniform too, and wondered what she would look like in it, and thought whether he should go see her. He knocked on her door. She asked who it was. He replied that he just wanted to ask if she needed anything before he went out. She asked him to come in, and when he did, he saw her face flushed and the sun behind her. Adele stood amazed and then told her she was beautiful. Rini blushed and asked if he was going somewhere. He joked that even her ears had reddened and said she had a very sweet side. Since today was a holiday, he thought to walk a bit in the city and advised her to rest well, because he'd be leaving now. But she asked him to wait and said she had something she needed to do. He asked what she meant and what she needed to do. She kept looking at him, embarrassed, and said, "Oh, guardian," he recalled. "Oh, right, I forgot I was her guardian. I totally forgot because I was so excited about relaxing." She said she'd go with him and might need to change clothes, asking him to wait. Then she asked how long he'd keep staring, and he replied he'd go wait for her outside. He's outside, his eyes starting to water because it's his day off, and he can't find any rest. He notices the city is lively and clean, and it's hard to believe there was a war here just 10 years ago. While reconstruction is still going on in the outskirts, the capital looks like this. Maybe the humans won the war, but they failed to fully control the capital. Tati Rennie calls him, grabs his shoulder and says, she wants to eat that thing. He asks if she means street food. She answers, yeah. We see them in front of a vendor grilling food that looks really appetizing. Adil asks, what kind of skewers are those? The man replies, they're marinated venison skewers with vegetables. Adil wonders if they're like chicken skewers and orders two. Rennie eats one, and Adil says he likes the taste and asks if she does. She says, amazing. He's surprised that a girl like her makes facial expressions like that and wonders if she's starting to open up to him a bit. Later, as they continue their tour of the city, Adil says he hasn't had true rest in a long time, and maybe this will be the last time he finds free time. He stops in front of a statue, looks at it and says he doesn't know who it is. He decides to ask Rennie, who is this? She replies, surprised he doesn't know, that it's the first demon queen. He says that explains a lot, and now that he thinks about it, she really does resemble Diana. He remarks he won't get many chances to see the first demon queen's face up close, so he wants to study it more. Suddenly, the statue's eyes light up intensely, and the necklace starts to glow too, which confuses him and makes him wonder what's happening. A green beam shoots from the statue straight to the necklace. Adil is still trying to understand what's happening, but notices one of the gems on the necklace has turned gray. Rennie asks him why he's staring like that. He looks puzzled and wonders if he imagined everything he saw, but he's sure he saw light coming from the statue and the necklace change color. He glances at her to see if she's tricking him or not, then realizes he's the only one who saw it. Until now, Adil had only found vague answers like offering sacrifices to the ruler, but now he's discovered something very important in a place he never expected, and it's connected to the first demon queen. If it plays a role in everything related to her, it will reveal something very important. Rennie says she thinks they should go back, but he's now extremely curious to know the truth about that necklace. The next day at the academy, it's time for the enrollment ceremony to start. The director and teachers are already sitting inside the hall where the ceremony will take place, and about 100 new students have arrived. He says the event is just like a normal enrollment ceremony, and some students look stunned, not believing the director is just a little girl. He remembers they were overwhelmed by her presence as soon as she walked in. Some people even started calling her cute. Here, Adil says, cute? Cute what? She's covered in tattoos and has a child's body and they call her cute. Then he wonders if his eyes are fooling him. He was the one who called her cute before. The director turns to them with a sharp look, and Adil is surprised. He quickly says he meant she's well-liked, and wonders if she can read minds. Eris orders them to be quiet, because the enrollment ceremony is about to begin. As the director's somewhat ordinary speech nears its end, the atmosphere gradually calms. The director says they must adhere to the site's laws, and that's the end of her speech. Now it's time for the top student and the runner-up to take the oath. The top student is none other than Diana, and the runner-up is Bolton. Someone says, as expected, those two took those positions. Rennie looks completely unfazed. The only reason she joined was to avenge her mother, so she's probably not interested in these details. As for him, it doesn't matter what people say, he has to focus on what he has to do. Then he senses something strange from his spider sense. Someone is pointing at him, it's Bolton. He wonders what Bolton is about but decides to ignore him and not respond. Then they ask the top student to step forward, Diana. Everyone can't help but stare at her. Adil says, as expected of someone blessed by the rulers, no one can stand in her way. Bolton and Diana begin reciting their oath, pledging to erase the shame and rebuild the demon kingdom. As they repeat their oath, the atmosphere in the hall changes. Anger rises among people who lost their homes and families at the hands of humans. If someone learns they belong to the arson lineage, just thinking about it is terrifying. In the worst case, they'll be tortured forever. Now the enrollment ceremony is over, and Ars asks everyone to look at the bulletin board behind them to find the classes they've been assigned to. Once they confirm, they must go to their assigned rooms. Adil tells Rennie, let's go. While everyone looks at the boards, he discovers he's been assigned to Class A and wonders where Rennie is. Then he bursts out with joy and starts crying, saying, oh my poor luck. Then he tells her she's in Class C and that he didn't want them separated. She replies, wipe that stupid expression off your face. Don't forget you're still my guardian, so come if I call. He says, sure, but in truth he tells himself, I'll never abandon her. He then tells himself he'll likely get some final rest. At that moment, someone bumps his shoulder, a person giving him a very hostile look. The other asks, want to die? Adil realizes who it is, the embodiment of gluttony, none other than Samuel. If he remembers correctly, Samuel is one of the strongest among the 7 deadly sins. He wonders why Samuel wants to start a fight, even after a simple bump. He tells himself this day will be full of strange things he must avoid at all costs. He apologizes and says he wasn't paying attention. Samuel replies for him to leave, adding he's lucky it's the first day of school. Adil sighs and asks himself, why are all the kids of the 7 deadly sins like this? He wonders if Bolton might also be in Class A. The scene shifts to the school and we hear a teacher asking if they refuse to believe her. Ars replies it's not the point. She says she's a professional teacher too. Ars responds that this child is very dangerous, and from his experience, the best person should handle him. She says there are students already assigned to her, and he can't simply override that. Finally, we learn her name is Idia. Lucian asks her to sit. Idia says that's harsh and asks why this always happens to her. She then asks Lucian Ars about the reason he wants to change the class he oversees. Ars replies he intends to take care of Adil himself because he's faced countless enemies on the battlefield unlike him. And this boy is a natural killer who could turn his sword on his allies at any moment, so he must be restrained from now on. Some other teachers say Ars is being overly cautious just because the boy is half demon and much weaker than the kids of the 7 deadly sins. But Ars replies that strength isn't measured only by physical power, but by courage and a calmness that's no less than those kids. The other teachers realize he might be right and add these are the reasons he wants to supervise Class A. Ars needs to be careful with him. Idia screams at him, asking him to slow down and telling him this basically means he doesn't trust her. Ars apologizes if he made her feel that way. Lucian sighs as they keep arguing. She interrupts and says, enough. Suddenly there's silence. She says she understands his concerns, but the classes have already been set, and changing them now would do more harm than good. Ars replies he understands, but Lucian says caution doesn't hurt, and asks Idia to give Adil special attention. She responds, she understands. Lucian ends the meeting, and tells the teachers to head to their classes to receive their students. The scene moves to Class A. Adil asks himself why his luck is so bad. Rand laughs in his face and says she's relieved. Diana isn't here, and Bolton isn't either, but Samuel is. Rand asks if he followed her here. He replies that class assignments were random. She laughs and says that's great and that she'll make him her slave now. Samuel calls them and says, if you don't obey, I'll kill you. Rand gets angry and shouts, who do you think you are to talk to us like that? Adil says he'll do his best and a tear rolls down his cheek. At that moment, the door bursts open and everyone turns to see Idia enter. She says they're making too much noise and asks if they really plan to fight on the first day of school. Adil recognizes her. She claps and says, hello everyone, introduces herself and asks them to remember her name. She says she's much older than them and people call her the Legion of Disaster, and it's said she killed 10,000 humans alone at the Pollux River, though some students believe the real number was 30,000. Adil thinks if the strongest is now a teacher, that might improve his chances of survival. With introductions done, Idia explains how their lessons will go. She says she'll teach them hunting methods, though she doesn't mean hunting demonic beasts or animals. A student asks, Then what will we hunt? She says they will hunt one of the reasons that brought them here, humans. Adil says this is when things start getting serious. She says she'll only teach the hunting methods. Magic and weapons training will be taught by other instructors. Rand says her face is kind of nice for a trainer. Idia adds she'll also be responsible for their basic physical endurance training. Adil says that's his weak point. She says she wants to start the first lesson, so they must all gather in the training yard. They move there, and Adil says the area is huge, maybe 4 or 5 times the size of a normal yard, and asks if it's for weapons or magic. Idia asks if everyone is present, then tells them to focus and keep their eyes on something that starts forming in front of her. That thing grows and grows until creatures emerge from the crack, not just one creature, but many pouring out. Adil shows his astonishment, and Idia says they're not real humans, they're just illusions she created with her magic. She adds she was the one who created the Sword Saint in the entrance exam. Adil replies she's monstrous for being able to create something like that, and the academy is really impressive, though the Royal Academy surpasses it by a wide margin, which gives him goosebumps. Idia says the mission is simple. They must get past the humans and reach her. She asks who wants to go first, then looks at Adil and asks if that's his name, telling him he has to try to stab her neck, exactly like he did with the Sword Saint. We see her smile. She's eccentric too. Adil thinks it's not just ours now. Idia is noticing him, and he wonders if he'll fight her right away. She says there's a trainer among those humans who is the source of their mental strength and their leader. When the leader falls, everyone else falls like dominoes, and if the leader is strong, the rest will be strong. She will play the role of the human's leader. Adil says he understands. It's like the rule, defeat the enemy by defeating its leader, and overcoming the leader among all those human soldiers should be very easy for someone like him. She replies with a smile because she thinks it will be impossible. She says they'll consider him successful in the mission if he can touch her body with his hand or his weapon, then says, start. Human illusions start gathering around her. Adel immediately uses his teleport skill, appears right behind her, and presses his dagger to her neck. She's surprised, and he whispers in her ear, asking, does this count as a success or not? He says he used to be dozens of meters away, but that distance doesn't matter now. He jumped from one version to another. He adds that at first he could only travel a few meters, so this is big progress, and now he can easily destroy an enemy base. Idia starts laughing, and we see a magical barrier preventing his dagger from piercing her. She says she now understands why she was told to be cautious of him, then touches his dagger and says he succeeded in the task and can return to his spot. He replies that he understands, but he can't tell whether those looks from her are hostile or curious, and he doesn't know what made her that excited. He thinks to himself, they definitely still haven't discovered who I am. Then she says, now that you've seen what Adele did, anyone who fails will take extra lessons. We hear the students attacking the illusions and shouting, die, humans. Adel notes they're doing the basics well, as he expected from demons, but they barely managed to take down a few. He says that if Idia had started controlling them directly, it would have been over in an instant. We see a student get stabbed by spears, and Adele says she would have really hurt someone. Another student says he'll jump over all of them, but archers shoot their arrows into the air and bring him down. Adele sits there a bit embarrassed and says, this teleport technique is really powerful. At this rate, I'll be able to reach the top of the class. Idia calls the next candidate, and Samuel tells Adele to go forward. Adele says he wants to see if Samuel's arrogant personality matches his actual skill level. Samuel says he'll start now. Adel watches tensely. The ground around him starts to spin, then the intensity increases each second until a massive green tornado appears before him. Adel plants his feet so he won't be thrown back, while Samuel knocks every human down in the blink of an eye. Samuel says this magic is insane, that it's his unique ability, and that it's a brutal skill that devours everything, so he'll temporarily give Adel first place in the class. As she brushes dirt off herself with her hand, she's completely unfazed, so Adele says, as expected, no teacher can be defeated by a mere trainee. Idia says Samuel knocked down everything except her, and it was so amazing she was shocked for a moment, but unfortunately he failed. Samuel is surprised. Idia snaps her fingers, and with that gesture, the entire army reforms. She explains it's because he didn't kill the leader. Humans will always find someone to fill gaps in their ranks no matter how many of them you kill. Adel says he can't believe she summoned that many. It must be no fewer than 200. She replies that Samuel's magic was very strong for a first-year trainee. Samuel begins trembling with anger. Idia calls the next trainee, and Samuel steps back angrily. Adele comments that his face is full of resentment, but he accepted the result well. Samuel looks at him, sees his smile, but says nothing, just remains angry. Adele says Samuel's overconfident overconfidence caused his failure. If Samuel had focused on the goal like him, he would have succeeded with no problem. Ran starts laughing and asks if they've waited long enough or what. Since it's finally her turn, they wonder how she'll handle the task. She starts commanding the humans, saying, "Do you really dare block my path?" Then laughs as people appear behind her. She keeps laughing, but they're confused about what she's doing exactly. Then we see her sweating nervously, asking herself what to do first. Adele comments, "As expected from the Lust family, she doesn't fight herself. She controls her servants like a queen bee and can't do anything without them." She sweats more in a panic and says she needs to do something. Suddenly she realizes something, turns straight to Adel, starts crying and begging him to help her, calling him my slave. Adel comments, "What did she just call me?" Everyone wonders what they heard. Did she really call him her slave? He asks himself what she's thinking to say something like that, but she's screaming for him to hurry and help her now. Idia raises a finger in silence, and the humans start advancing toward Ran and begin hitting her hard. Adele asks himself, could she not use magical reinforcement on herself? But he says that doesn't make sense, maybe there's a special reason. Ran begins yelling for someone to help her. Adel turns and sees healing magic being used. A knee is completely healed by a girl. Adel says that's an ability only humans have, which means she's half demon too. He can't believe there's a girl with a rare healing talent in the same class. He can't remember her name, but realizes he needs to find a way to communicate with her, and wonders whether the chance to approach her is still available now. Idia says Ran was asking Adel for help a little while ago, and now that the test is over, it would be kind of nice if he helped her get up. He replies that he understands and will go help her immediately, saying the timing couldn't be worse. Adele goes to her, taps Ran's forehead with his finger and says, "You're useless." She replies that she's a little sore. He tells her to get up now since it's over. But she starts trembling and asks if he saw everything. Then she begins to cry. He asks what she means, and she tells him to stop messing around and not to call her slave. He replies that he saw her weaker than a slave. Does he mock her? At that moment, Idia claps and asks everyone to clean up the place and gather. She says she had some expectations, and the results came out as she predicted, and they did a good job for their first lesson. She adds that it's important they experience things like this to know their true standing, where they make mistakes, and what their limits are, because knowing these things lets them support each other to work together perfectly in battles. After that, Adele explains that in the Imperial Human School, students are ranked by ability, but here, classes are distributed randomly, so cohesion is fundamental. It's clear Idia is trying to highlight that point. Idia says the only person who passed the challenge was Adele, and she's excited to see his progress. Adele replies that he'll do his best to learn everything. She tells him to return to the class to prepare for the next session. He tells himself this was a kind of praise from her, but all he did was make Samuel angrier, and Ran always tries to make him her slave, so he's not sure if he could ever form his own faction here. When they returned to class, and after Idia's lesson ended, the other lessons began, and they met the lecturer in charge of theory. In the theory lesson, they learned about the history of the demon world and human weaknesses, and now they study body structure. Adele comments that this confirms hitting a demon in sensitive spots will hurt them. The lecturer tells them there will be a test on what they learned today, so anyone who wants to avoid remedial lessons must memorize everything. Adele closes his book, puts his head on the desk, and asks himself if this is real, because it feels exactly like his old school days. He sighs and says this is his first day, and he's already starting to feel defeated. All the other students seem to be enjoying themselves, while Adel starts to cry, saying he has no friends, just like before. Then he spots the girl he saw earlier and thinks she might be a good opportunity. He stands up and says he has to go talk to her. As he approaches, he calls out and introduces himself, and everyone looks at him in surprise at what he's doing. All he wants is to understand why everyone is staring at him. She says, "Nice to meet you," and he replies that when two half-demons do anything, they'll attract attention. She looks nervous, so he decides to postpone talking to her and tells her he'll talk later, then leaves. He sighs and thinks he might go to the restroom to eat the little poisonous dragon, but when he opens the door, Samuel appears. Adel says, "Bad timing." Samuel asks what he wants, and Adel replies he was just passing by and will get out of his way. Samuel calls him disgusting and insults him as a filthy creature. This time Adele loses his temper and says Samuel's family must be remarkable to have produced trash that walks and talks like him. They must be special. Samuel boils with anger, grits his teeth, releases his aura, and says he'll cut him to pieces. Adele comments that unlike Bolton, this person shows pure hatred and hostility, and if he gets in his way, it's best to deal with him now. They're about to start a fight when the lecturer intervenes, telling them to stop immediately and saying class will begin so everyone must return to their seats. He speaks to both of them, and both of them are surprised and wonder when he arrived. The theory teacher was standing by his desk as if he appeared out of thin air. He smiles kindly and asks them to go back to their places because the lesson is about to start. Adele and Samuel look at the man in astonishment at his sudden, calm presence. Samuel glares at him without speaking as he goes back to his place. Adele is uneasy about the teacher's sudden appearance without anyone noticing, especially since he seemed to nullify both his and Samuel's abilities. He can't help wondering who this teacher really is. The teacher adjusts his glasses and asks the students to return to their seats quickly so he can introduce himself. Samuel makes a sound of displeasure about the situation and returns heavily to his seat, leaving Adele worried about how easily everything was calmed. The teacher calls for silence and introduces himself as Roblet, explaining he will be in charge of magic from now on. Adele understands. It makes sense to have a magic subject at the Sade Academy, and given the Academy's reputation, Roblet must be very skilled. This seems promising for our hero. After all, magic is a core element in any fantasy world. In his novel, magic wasn't just a talent or ability. It was more like a skill, or even an academic science from Adele's perspective. Roblet begins his lesson and explains that understanding traits is the basis for learning magic. He clarifies that the basic elements are earth, water, air, and fire, plus 2 additional core traits, darkness and light, making 6 core traits in total. Adele thinks about it. Most people have only 1 trait, but he has 2. The Paris family was definitely tied to the darkness trait, but he wasn't sure about the Arson family's trait. Roblet announced that today's lesson would be about determining each trainee's mana attribute. Then he pulled out a purple magic orb and explained that when you put your hand on it, its color would change and reveal your attribute. He told them to line up. Adele decided to hang back a bit and watch the others first. A student stepped forward hesitantly, and when he touched the orb it lit up red, signaling the fire attribute. The next student showed a green glow, indicating wind, and another revealed earth. The process went quickly until it was Ideal's turn. Roblet called, "Trainee Idle," which surprised our hero a bit since the teacher seemed to know his name. Roblet urged him to put his hand on the orb quickly. Ideal did so and placed his palm on the orb. The orb responded, but instead of lighting a single color, it lit up oddly, half black and the other half gray. Roblet lowered his voice and whispered, "This is very rare," and confirmed that black indicates the darkness attribute common among high-ranking demons, but admitted the gray was new to him. Ideal wondered to himself, even the teacher doesn't know what this gray means? Roblet chuckled softly and said, "No, I know, but it's very rare." Then explained that gray symbolizes chaos, a magical attribute that defies law and the natural order. Ideal was stunned, wondering how such magic could exist. Roblet apologized and said he didn't know much about this rare attribute. Ideal accepted that and told himself he'd never heard of it, not even in his stories. The phrase "magic that defies the natural order" grabbed his attention. It might be a key to something, but he decided to focus for now on the darkness attribute he knew. As he returned to his spot, thinking about what gray mana might mean, Ran suddenly appeared behind him, though our hero had already sensed her presence. Ran was startled and anxiously demanded to know how he had detected her stealth technique. Ideal asked which technique she meant, but she ignored the question and thought for a moment before asking what he had been thinking about when he provoked Samuel earlier. Ideal played dumb and simply said he couldn't stand bullying. Ran pressed him and asked if he understood the consequences of messing with the Samuel family. He shrugged and justified that outside powers couldn't interfere in the academy in any way. Ran sighed in frustration at his obvious ignorance and said she didn't mean it like that. She began explaining that it wasn't just old grudges between demons related to the Samuel family, then paused with another sigh and told him she'd return now and warned him to be careful from now on. Ideal watched her walk away, wondering if she was warning him about the Samuel family's reputation for brutal revenge or something else. Her tone didn't strongly suggest that, but he dismissed the thought to focus on the last class of the day. Suddenly, a heavy hand slammed down on the trainer's desk. It was the instructor Ares, who would be their fencing coach. He looked at the class with an angry glare and called them weak, saying none of them deserved to be at the academy under normal circumstances. He scolded them harshly for their poor performance and said they had all failed the entrance exam against a training dummy that used only 10% of its power. Except for the top 8 groups, everyone had utterly failed. Ideal felt the provocative speech was deliberately meant to wound their pride. Ares announced he would teach them the art of fencing, and made clear that even if they died, at least they should be able to take an opponent's arm with them. His first command was obvious: running. He shouted that physical strength is the foundation of fencing, that it greatly amplifies combat techniques and can at least double or triple them. The students quickly started panting and complaining that they'd die after about 30 laps around the arena. Ares noticed Ran and Samuel using mana and angrily shouted, "Who told you to use mana while running?" and forced them to apologize and start over. Idil smiled watching the spoiled wealthy kids try to cheat, and remembered his past in this world. Since entering it, he'd faced hardships. First he fought knights in the human world, then fled to the demon world and caused a lot of chaos, and he was also at risk of death if his identity was discovered. Finally, Ares stopped them and allowed those who finished 50 laps to return to their dorms, while he assigned extra sessions to those who couldn't finish on time. Idil was exhausted and admitted to himself the day hadn't been easy at all, so he decided to go back to the dorm. As he approached the huge dorm building, he felt utterly worn out and only wanted to rest. While wondering where the boys' entrance was, someone put a hand on his shoulder, and he tensed. He turned to find Rini standing there with a serious look on her face. He was surprised to see her there. Idil spoke politely and asked if she was also going to the dorm. She replied briefly, "Yeah." He asked about her first day in class, but her silence and sharp look made him wonder if a student had upset her. Finally, she said simply, "This isn't enough." He was puzzled and waited for her to explain. She clarified that the training wasn't sufficient and asked him to help her with cool-down exercises after classes. Her expression left no room for refusal. He sighed at her relentless energy but agreed. She told him there was a private training ground nearby and suggested they hurry since time was limited. Despite hesitating, he knew training next to an heir of one of the 7 deadly sins would be useful, no matter how tough it got. They quickly reached the training building. Inside, Idil noticed a wide space filled with various training equipment and students intensely focused on their training. The advanced equipment and the atmosphere made it clear the place was designed to significantly strengthen physical power. Rini pointed Idil to an iron bar loaded with weights and suggested he start with it. Idil asked to go first, ignored her comment about its heavy weight, and said confidently that he had years of training. He grabbed the bar and tried to lift it with all his strength, but it didn't move an inch. Rini watched him and told him he was very weak and needed to stop before he hurt himself. Idil agreed his body, used to a quiet life at home, wasn't ready for this kind of exertion. Idil stepped back, and Rini lifted the heavy weight over her head with ease, leaving him impressed by her superhuman strength. He admitted to himself the big gap between their abilities and decided he'd work much harder. After 2 hours of intense training, Idil suggested they finish the session, and Rini agreed. He offered to walk her back to the dorm, and she accepted. On the way back, he thought about how much training he'd done. Curious how much he'd improved, he decided to check his physical status, while Rini went to change. The screen displayed his stats: half-demon orientation chaotic, talent, spatial swap, level 2, and other traits like darkness and prideful eye. His mana rose to 1,321 after being 1297. He noticed the gain was small, only 24 points, even though he trained mana control techniques every night. He understood he was in a slow growth stage, and began thinking about looking for an elixir to speed things up. At that moment, Rini said she was ready. When he asked what she was doing, he pretended not to notice. They walked together to the massive dorm building. Idil bade Rini good night and wished her a quiet evening. She returned the same. He was about to collapse from fatigue, so he ran to his room with the instruction slip that read, "Go up the stairs and enter right." He checked his admission paper and found his room was number 407. Reaching the 4th floor, he wondered who his roommate would be, and hoped for someone competent and respectful, maybe a future ally. The idea of actually having a first real friend in this world made him a little excited. He opened the door and politely offered a greeting. Unfortunately, his luck was bad. The moment he entered the room, he froze. A student sat calmly on one of the beds eating candy. Yes, it was Samuel. Idil stared at him in disbelief and thought, "What is Samuel doing in my room?" Samuel looked at him angrily with the same question on his face and dropped the candy from shock. After a moment, Idil cursed his bad luck. Of all people, he had to share a room with this guy. They stared at each other in silence until Samuel broke it with a complaint. "Insulting our hero, you filthy hybrid." That line made Idil consider finishing him right then, but he sighed and decided to postpone the fight. Idil stood up suddenly, which confused Samuel, who snapped in a sharp tone asking if he wanted to fight. Idil calmly said he was just going out for a bit, and that brawls in the dorm would cause them trouble. He wished him a quiet night with brief, polite words, and turned to leave. Samuel muttered angrily, calling Idil obnoxious and annoying. Outside, Idil boiled with anger and decided to walk until the idiot fell asleep. He couldn't understand why Samuel was so furious, especially since Samuel wasn't from the Wrath family at all. Idil recalled that Samuel was heir to the Gluttony family, and wondered if his anger was tied to his nature, maybe like Idil's chaos trait. He began thinking about what chaos truly meant. Was it merely a mana property? He considered going back to his information sheet but decided not to, since if it could explain chaos, it would have done so already when teaching him his body's abilities. So there was no reason to waste money. Frustrated by the lack of answers and his ignorance, he looked for a quiet place to practice mana techniques. He found a secluded spot under a large tree and noticed a small bird perched on a branch. The presence of such a normal creature in a demon academy felt strange and pleasant at the same time. He thought about it a bit and admitted that wild creatures roaming the site was an interesting detail. Late that night, Edil slipped back into his room. Luckily for him, Samuel was in a deep sleep. Edil flopped onto the bed, feeling like he might faint any second. But since he was disciplined, he decided to do a little mana training before sleeping. He lay on his back and began to circulate mana through his body. While Idil was dozing off without realizing, Samuel stood silently by his bed, his eyes glowing with a faint light. He was watching Idil sleep. To Samuel, Idil looked irritating and stupid, and his features seemed to show that stupidity even while unconscious. What made Samuel angrier was Idil's insult to his family. Although he admitted some responsibility for their past fights, his pride wouldn't let him apologize first. He sighed, turned away, and told himself he had responsibilities and plenty to do. He wondered why he felt compelled to worry about that dumb, worthless fool. He was just an unnecessary burden, but he couldn't forget the energy Idil had shown in the first lesson, which left a sharp pain in his chest. He felt it was a familiar sensation, but couldn't remember when he'd felt it before. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain. He doubled over, gasping, as the pain spread through his body. He cursed inwardly, realizing the greed was attacking him again, filling him with uncontrollable hunger. The pain was unbearable, like his innards drying up and turning to dust. Idil muttered something unintelligible in his sleep and shifted a bit. That sound struck Samuel's nerves even more. Just having to tolerate his arrogant face until morning felt like a kind of torture. The urge to stab him with a pen, then, was irresistible. Finally, the next day came and morning light filled the room. Idil moved and sat up slowly, asking himself if it was really morning. His eyes gradually adjusted to the light coming from the window. He looked out and saw a bird on a branch of the tree, the same bird he'd seen yesterday, and said, "Looks like there's an early visitor this morning," but its presence made him uneasy. Sight is very sensitive to any external intrusion, which makes it hard to allow non-students in. Suspicion crept in. Someone's watching me for sure. He suspected the instructor Ares since he distrusted him most. He checked the bird quickly with mana to see if it was a living creature or just an illusion. He thought about trying to tame it with food and started making bird sounds to attract it. He remembered something, and when he looked around, he found Samuel's bed empty. "My roommate must have gone down for breakfast already," he said. Idil realized he needed to hurry before the food ran out, but he stopped. He had no idea where the dining hall was. By the time he reached the classroom, the teacher, Idea, had already come in and greeted everyone with a bright smile. "Good morning." Idil sat quietly in his seat, annoyed that the delay had cost him breakfast. He was worried that hunger would make it hard to focus. Idea asked for everyone's attention and announced she had an important announcement, making sure everyone was present. She said that during today's class, they would choose the class representative. That sudden announcement prompted a student to raise a hand and ask how the selection would be made. Idea explained she had intended to hold a vote, but changed her mind and would choose the representative herself. Rand smiled with overconfidence and loudly praised the teacher's decision. It was obvious she expected to be chosen. Idil remembered that detail from the story. Rand was supposed to be the representative since Samuel by nature wasn't fit for leadership. Rand stood arrogantly and proudly declared that everyone should treat her like their queen, laughing her haughty laugh. Despite her attitude, Idil admitted Rand wasn't a completely bad choice. She lacked intelligence, but had charisma and useful support skills. Whispers spread among the students. Some thought Idil looked more competent, but the idea of a half-demon as class rep was quickly rejected. One person suggested Samuel, but others found him too scary. Idil felt a bit amused when he heard his name mentioned, even for a moment. It seemed Rand would definitely win. Idea urged her to announce the decision quickly. The teacher paused a little, then said the class rep was not the trainee Ran. Ran froze, her confident expression turning to surprise. Idea smiled, her eyes shining, and announced that the class representative is Idil. The name echoed in the suddenly silent room and hit Idil directly. He stared ahead, completely stunned. The whole thing felt ridiculous to him. What was Idea thinking, appointing a half-demon as class rep? The teacher approached him and expressed hope that he would lead the class well. Still shocked, he managed a hesitant agreement. Then Idea explained she had another class to teach and would announce the rest quickly before leaving. In preparation for the midterm practical exam, upcoming classes will focus heavily on hands-on training, she said. At that, Samuel made an annoyed sound. The teacher clarified these practical trainings would be done in teams of 3 students, and everyone had to have their team formed by the end of the day. Worry showed on the face of the pink-haired healer when she heard this. Based on what he knew about Sight's practical exam, Edil was fairly sure it would involve killing people. After all, killing was a core part of combat training there. Idea announced the end of the class, but suddenly called Ran back with a warning smile. She warned Ran that if she dared speak to her informally like that again, she would have to take private lessons next time. Ran trembled and understood the threat clearly. Idil watched with admiration at how Idea put that arrogant air in her place. Before leaving, Idea gave her final instructions. She reminded Idil that, as the new class leader, he had to submit the team lists before the end of the day, and wished the class luck. Idil thought about the practical side of the exams, and whether they would actually do them. Using dolls from Idea seemed unlikely, since teams were required, and from the sequence of events in the story, he knew the major incident involving an attack on the human world hadn't come yet. The most important task now was forming a proper team. He glanced at the pink-haired healer. He'd already decided who most of his team members would be. At that time, elsewhere in the academy, the teacher Ares walked with a grim determination. He found Idea sitting in her office. He barged in without preamble and called her name sharply. Idea looked at him calmly, and with eyes burning, he demanded to know what she had been thinking. She replied with a slight smile, saying she hadn't seen that serious face in a while, and that he looked somewhat pleasant. Ares wasn't in the mood for joking and snapped that this wasn't the time for jokes. He demanded she explain why she'd appointed Edil class rep. Idea remarked, "Seems like you have many eyes in sight," but his knowledge of the quick appointment didn't surprise her. Ares asked if she truly understood the consequences of giving Edil authority over the class. Idea confirmed she did, and clarified she had given Edil temporary authority over the class. Ares slammed his hand on the desk and yelled that she'd gone mad. He shouted that there was still time, and she had to change the class rep immediately. He glared, warning her that if she didn't, but Idea remained calm, crossing her arms and coldly saying she wouldn't replace the class rep. Ares put his hands on his head and screamed that her stubbornness would drive him insane. Idea explained she liked Edil, his skills were top tier, and he wasn't arrogant like the heirs of the 7 sins. Besides, his identity was verified thanks to the Paris family's support. Ares replied that a verified identity didn't necessarily mean he was trustworthy, and an unknown sword, meaning a person whose intentions weren't known, was the most dangerous kind of weapon. Idea sighed wearily, as if tired of his insistence, then stood and confidently said she would handle everything herself, ordering him to stay out of it. She said she was confident in her ability to discover talent even if she was a new teacher. As she left, Ares called after her angrily, but she ignored him. He muttered a curse as he turned his back in anger, boiling inside and regretting not taking the class leadership himself. Letting someone who might be that dangerous be under Idea's supervision was a big mistake. More importantly, the half-demon who left a wound that couldn't be forgotten in him during their last battle somehow reminded him of Edil's aura. Although a direct blood relation was unlikely, the strange similarity in their auras was suspicious and couldn't be ignored. The matter bothered Ares a lot. Since he still didn't trust Edil's true intentions, Ares whistled sharply and his bird returned, circling in the sky. While reviewing the information the bird had gathered, he noticed Edil hadn't done anything suspicious so far. The little bird flew off again, and he ordered it to keep watching Edil closely. Ares decided he wouldn't take his eyes off our protagonist for even a moment.